Hello everybody, it's Sarah, and today's video is my February wrap-up as well as my March TBR chart picks. And I'm actually quite excited because I did manage to read more books than I thought I would be able to. I mean, I think it's still a booktube average since I managed to read 4 books. 2 of those were rereads, so quite quickly done. But I was in Korea for 2 weeks last month, so I only really had 2 weeks to read. Because as I predicted, I didn't really read a lot while I was in Korea because there was just so much else to do. So reading kind of was put on the back burner, which is totally okay. But as I said, I still managed to read 4 books. And now let me just talk about all the books that I read and all the books that I started this month. First, I just want to quickly mention these 2 books, which are Peter Holtz by Ingo Schulze and The Masked City by Genevieve Cogman. Those of you who watched my January wrap-up will recognize those 2 as books that I started in January. And I did kind of continue, and also not really, because I read about 20 pages for each of those books in February. So not really worth a mention, but definitely on the top of my TBR for March. Okay, now let me get onto the books that I actually read in February. The first book I finished was The 5th Season by N.K. Jemisin, which is the first book in the Broken Earth series. And this book has been on my TBR for quite some time, so I am happy that because of a buddy read, I finally got to read this book, and I did enjoy it, but let me get into that a bit more later. I was kind of surprised because as an Austrian, it didn't occur to me that February is Black History Month in the US. And so a lot of people read this book at the same time as I did, because the author, of course, is a Black author. And I just really enjoyed this feeling going on my timeline and having a lot of people like publish their thoughts on this book at the same time as I was reading it. It just was a really nice experience overall. I'm not really sure in which genre I should put this book. It's an adult novel, but it's kind of high fantasy, but also kind of dystopian. It's a dystopian high fantasy, I would say. It's set in a world that constantly has to deal with massive earthquakes and so-called seasons, which kind of are like the apocalypse, I would say. Just everything gets destroyed and whoever survives, survives, and a lot of people don't. And it follows a bunch of women who are so-called orogenes, and these are people that can control the earthquakes, kind of. They can create earthquakes, but they can also stop the earthquakes, and generally they are very hated and very feared in this world. I think I gave this a rating of 3 stars, 3.5 stars. I did overall enjoy this book, however, it is very slow. And I'm used to slow books, of course. I read a lot of high fantasy. A lot of first books in high fantasy series are very slow, but I think this book was slow even for a high fantasy book. The pacing of this story would more fit a longer series of 5+ books than just a trilogy, so I was a little bit bummed by that. And also I think one of the reasons why it seemed so slow to me is that I didn't really care about any of the characters, and I am personally someone who enjoys having characters, not that I can relate to, I don't care about relatability of characters, but I would like to have at least one character that I care about. And I didn't really have that in this book, sadly. However, when it comes to high fantasy, especially adult high fantasy, I'm also okay if there's not really a person that I care about in the first book, because maybe I'll start caring about the characters later on in the books. Throughout most of the book, I did have the feeling that I want to pick up the second book. I was interested enough, I was intrigued enough by the world. However, most of the time I kind of had the feeling of, I want to pick up the second book, but it's not really at the top of my TBR when I finish it. But the ending totally turned that around. This book probably has one of the best endings that I have ever read about. It was absolutely amazing, and now I do want to get to the second book, maybe this year. Let's see. I'm on a book buying ban because I spent way too much in Korea, so my kind of book buying ban turned into a you have 4 books that you already know you want to buy, that you're allowed to buy, but aside from that, you're not allowed to buy any books until summer. So we'll see when I'll get to the second book, but I definitely do want to pick up the second book now. And before, it was just like maybe sometime in the future. So I still do recommend this book. There was probably quite a confusing summary of my thoughts on this book, but bottom line is I would recommend it, but if you don't like slow books, maybe not as much. The second new book that I finished was actually a book that I already started a few months ago, and then it was one of the picks from the TBR chart for February. It was the pick that I chose, and that is Bullet by Laurel K. Hamilton, which is the 19th book, I believe, in the Anita Blake Vampire Hunter series. I started this in September, I think, and then I stopped because it wasn't that exciting. It's honestly one of the books in the Anita Blake Vampire Hunter series that I enjoyed the least, probably. I mean, the whole series, especially after the 10th book, is not like good. There are quite a few problematic things in the series, and just after the 10th book there isn't any plot anymore. It's basically just erotical novels and a lot of sex. But it's my guilty pleasure and I still quite enjoy reading the books, so I do still want to finish the series. But this one had less sex in it than the last few books before that, but at the same time weirdly also less plot. To me it seems like nothing really happened in the whole book, so I gave it 2.5 stars I think on Goodreads and just left it at that. But yeah, I'm excited to finally be done with this book. Then, as I said, two books that I read in February were rereads, and those two books were Anne Bishop's Written in Red and Murder of Crows, which are the first two books in the other series, and I finally want to get around to reading the 6th book in the series as well as the 7th book, which I think should be published tomorrow. I need to still order both of the books. I know I'm kind of slow, but those are two of the books that are exempt from my book buying ban, by the way. Anyway, I don't really have to reread the series because the two books that I still have left are spin-offs and don't really follow the characters of the series, so all this stuff that happened doesn't really have to be fresh on my mind. But I still wanted to give the series a reread, so I'm currently reading the 3rd book, and once I'm done with the 5th book, I will order the other two books and then read them. I still love these books. They are urban fantasy, but they're not set in our world, but they're set in a world that is very much modeled after our own. And if you want to know more about it, all about my thoughts and also what it's about, I talk more about the series in the first part of my Anne Bishop Spotlight series videos, and I will leave that link down below so you can go and check that out. And the last book that I quickly want to mention is the book that I took with me to Korea, and I read about 130 pages, which isn't a lot, but like, as I said, I had other stuff to do, and that is The Legion of Flame by Anthony Ryan, which is the 2nd book in the Draconis Memoria series. I picked up the 1st book around a year ago and I really enjoyed it. It's kind of a steampunk with dragons novel, adult high fantasy, and it's just overall a really enjoyable read. So I wanted to finally get around to the 2nd book, and I finally picked it up, and I hope I'll finish it in March. So now the last thing for this video is to talk about the picks from my TBR chart for March, and I actually picked out 3 books already because I wasn't sure when I'd get around to filming this video, and I didn't want to only pick out the books when March is already half done. So now let me share the books that I drew out of my jar cup thingy back here. The first one is Shamans Crossing by Robin Hobb, which is the 1st book in a trilogy that I don't know the name of, but it's not part of her Realms of the Elderling series. I got the whole trilogy a few years back second hand as a present from a friend of my mom who didn't need it anymore, and yeah, I'm excited to maybe pick this up this month. I'm not sure yet. The next book I drew out of the jar is Thieves' Magic by Trudy Canavan, which is the 1st book in the Millennium's Rule series. And for those of you who don't know, Trudy Canavan's Black Magician series, I think I got the name correct. As always, for some reason I never remember the name of this series. But anyway, that series was one of the first series that I ever read in the genre of high fantasy, of adult high fantasy. I think I was 12 at the time or something. And it just very much owns a nostalgic spot in my heart. So I own this book since it came out, and I still haven't read it, but I definitely want to get to it. And I think this is probably the most likely to be my pick for March. I can't promise though. And then my last book is a book that has been on my TBR for ages, I think 8+ years probably, and that is The Clan of the Cave Bear by Jean M. Auel. I hope I pronounced the name correctly, and it's kind of a historical fiction novel, as far as I gathered, set in the Stone Ages. I don't know. It's just, I think this is one of those novels that I just picked up at a train station once because I had a really long train ride before me, and then I didn't read it on the train ride, and so it just was on my TBR since then, because yeah, I never felt like picking it up. We'll see if I will finally pick it up this month though. And that was it for my February wrap-up as well as my March TBR chart. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, maybe think about giving me a thumbs up and also maybe subscribing. Tell me in the comments down below what you read in February. Was it a good reading month? Was it a bad reading month? What do you plan on reading in March? And also, if you're ever interested in reading any of the books that I pick out of my TBR chart, send me a DM on Twitter. Maybe we can buddy read it. I'm always up for a buddy read because it just makes it more exciting to read a book, and I just manage to read a book more quickly that way. So my DMs are always open. All the links to my social media are in the description box down below, so go and check those out. And again, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you soon. Bye!